In this video we're going to cover Chapter 1, and we're going to start by talking a little bit about a suggested way to approach the online lectures, and then we'll cover the material, which is largely definitional and is really an introduction to some of the stuff we're going to cover in the course in more depth in later chapters. So let's get started. So I'm going to post the chapter outline, and it's a Word document. The first chapter, since it's a lot of the foundation that we'll build upon in terms of vocabulary and concepts, we're going to cover most of Chapter 1. A good way to work this is with the workflow that I have outlined, where the first thing you should do is look at the chapter outline, and that'll tell you the major sections and the subsections that we're going to cover. Then go to the book and read the appropriate sections. Finally, come to D2L and listen to the videos, and occasionally there'll be some other online resources, maybe an external video from YouTube or some other type of online content for you to learn the material. My goal is not to make these chapter videos too long, just for the sake of attention, and I think this one will just go until the end. In other chapters I might break it up to keep the videos at a manageable size. So let's get going, and we'll start with some definitions. First one is what e-commerce is. So generally it is doing business, buying and selling things on the internet. And a more formal definition is digitally enabled commercial transactions between and among organizations and individuals. There's another term that your book uses, and that is e-business. And a way to think of e-business is just the digitally enabled transactions, but that occur within the firm as opposed to a commercial exchange. So e-commerce is really doing business with customers, and e-business is different ways to handle transactions within the firm. Let's continue on and talk about e-commerce. So there are 8 unique features, and what we'll do is we'll introduce them, talk about them, and give you some examples where appropriate. The first unique feature is ubiquity, and that just means that it is everywhere. And this is primarily due to the advent of the mobile phone, smartphones, internet access through 4G, where it really makes it a realistic possibility to order something via your phone. The next feature is global reach, and you'll notice that a lot of these features of e-commerce really come from the internet and the global reach that we have through the internet. We'll also see, as we're looking at some of these features, that while they are beneficial in a lot of cases, there are some drawbacks, and we'll talk about those. So certainly the global reach is the ability to reach customers essentially anywhere the internet goes. Limitations, as you would expect, include things like being able to deliver to different parts of the world, also language barriers, and other issues like that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the course. Next, we have universal standards, and this is just the set of standards for commerce that is consistent around the reach of the internet. And this isn't really something that has been achieved. Certainly everything from currencies of different countries and regions to different standards for security and privacy laws. For example, any company in the European Union has to follow a more strict set of privacy and security laws than, let's say, we do here in the United States. The social aspect of technology is something that's pretty common for what we're doing, whether it is things like using Groupon or Yelp. Obviously Facebook is a part of this, and it certainly plays a role in the popularity and success of e-commerce. Next is two terms. We'll define them and just give you some brief examples: personalization and customization. So what we're talking about here for personalization is how we can get things tailored to our personal likings. Simple examples include things like going on Amazon. Recently I've been looking for a new mic for my computer to improve the sound quality of these video lectures, and now every time I go back on there, no matter what I'm looking for, there's always a suggestion on the front page. Here's what you looked at, check these items out. The customization term refers to having the products tailored specifically to our needs, and examples of that would be if you're building a personal computer and you want to change out the hard drive or the amount of RAM. So those two terms are really synonymous with the benefits of e-commerce. When you think of a company like Dell, who used to only build computers after they were customized and ordered and paid for, and that's pretty significant, a significant change in the way businesses operated. Next we have information density. When we think of information density, it's just the amount of information and the quality of the information that is available to all of the participants, the businesses, and the consumers. And when you look for products to purchase, whether it's a new car, whether it's a computer, the amount of information that we have in terms of pricing, in terms of options, in terms of competitors is pretty significant, and that is certainly due to the advent of the internet, and that's a key component to e-commerce. Next we have interactivity, and this is just simply the two-way nature of e-commerce, and that just means instead of just being a consumer and being passive as you would be listening to a commercial on television, to let's say reading an article, you have the ability to choose what you want. You have the ability to go to I'm sorry, I'm adjusting the volume down here. The ability to go to certain parts of the information, whether it's specifications, whether it's compatibility, whether it's accessories. Certainly interactivity is a good part of e-commerce. Next and lastly, we have the richness. This is really a former trade-off between reach and richness, and the best example is when you used to get personal help face-to-face in a brick-and-mortar store, and the ability of a competent salesperson to sell you on the benefits, steer you towards the best possible fitting product for your needs. And when you used to go to a wider market, let's say with a radio spot, television ad, you didn't have that richness in the sales pitch. Now we kind of can have both with things like videos when we buy things, having things like real-time chat, and then also some phone-based customer service as well. So we're going to talk about the reasons why we study e-commerce. I think for this group and our experience with e-commerce, I don't think we need that much convincing how important e-commerce is. But when you consider e-commerce in terms of how it affects business, it's pretty significant. It is different and more powerful than any of the other paradigm shifts we've had in business, whether it's things like mail order, things like different forms of media and advertising. E-commerce brings fundamental changes to business and how we sell things. Think about how customers order things, how that has changed, how companies have to deliver to get the product from their warehouses to the customers, how that's changed. Think about how things are advertised, and pretty significant in terms of how we've had to change the way we do business. Traditional commerce treated customers as passive targets. Just here is the commercial and listened to it, and now things have changed, and had to do with producing things to reach the widest possible market. It was typically sales force driven. A lot of times we would make a product and then try to figure out how to convince people that that's the thing they need. That's the product that they would need to meet whatever needs that they have. There were fixed prices, and that's really consistent with mass marketing. In other words, if you market to a wide audience, let's say the United States, you really have to have your prices fixed across all of that region. And of course there are some exceptions, but largely that was the case. And the term that kind of encompasses that difference in terms of information is the asymmetry of the information. It was really loaded on the business side, and now with e-commerce we can get a lot more information as consumers, and certainly that changes the game. Here's a couple of graphs just to show you how the growth of e-commerce has looked over the past decade or two. So let's first start with this B2C e-commerce. The thing to notice is right after about 2010, so we've got the years on the bottom here, and we've got the revenue in billions of dollars, and right around 2010 we get this really kind of consistent linear increase, and it goes all the way up to projections of right around $8 billion in 2019. Let's take a look at a similar trend in B2B e-commerce, and you can see we've got that same steady increase. Obviously businesses buy a lot more than consumers, and this is scaled in the trillions. Right. In the next slide we're going to look at types of e-commerce, and what we're going to do is we're going to talk about them briefly, and the one we'll focus on this class is going to be B2C e-commerce. So we'll give you some examples of different types of B2C e-commerce in the next slide. Business to business, really similar in a lot of ways to B2C e-commerce. Obviously the volume is going to be different, the payment structure is going to be different, and we'll mention briefly some things about B2B e-commerce. Consumer to consumer, that would involve things like some parts of eBay. Obviously eBay has kind of morphed into a B2C, C2C kind of mishmash depending on what seller you're going to, but traditionally eBay was a consumer to consumer kind of auction site. Other examples, Craigslist would be included in C2C. So that's kind of a way to categorize the type of e-commerce based on who's doing the selling and who's doing the buying. We can also categorize types of e-commerce based on the platform that we're using. Mobile e-commerce on our smartphones, for example. We can also categorize things based on the community that drives the e-commerce, social e-commerce from things like Groupon, Facebook, things like Yelp, and so forth. And then lastly, local e-commerce, and that's going to be Yelp, I guess, fits into that category as well, and so does Groupon, and it's just based on location and giving the advertising and deals most relevant to the geographic location of the user.